Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Today's session, the final installment of our 2021 Compliance Leadership Development Forum, and it's focused on the question of applying your leadership skills. And over our previous 3 sessions, we learned several concepts that are considered essential components of being a successful compliance leader in the life insurance industry. If you recall, we started with an examination of the question of the essential attributes of being a compliance leader. And then we followed that with a rather candid discussion about whether you may want to be a chief compliance officer, and also maybe equally importantly, why perhaps you might not with a current and former chief compliance officer. And then if you recall, we also had our last session was devoted to the question of communications. So today what we'd like to do is we'd like to build upon those previous sessions by discussing how these skills are complied by current compliance leaders in our industry. And we're very pleased to have with us today 2 of the leading compliance officers of CEPLI member companies. We are joined today by Megan Claypool, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Compliance Officer at Athene USA. And also we are joined by Jim Golombieski, and Jim serves as General Counsel, Vice President of Compliance, and Corporate Secretary at Sagicor Life. So welcome, Megan, welcome, Jim, and thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
So in terms of our session today, we'd like to begin by asking each of you, we know that many of the characteristics, perhaps the responsibilities that you take on with regard to your positions as chief compliance officers at your respective company are somewhat similar, but we also recognize that there are differences between your organizations. And I think it would be helpful for our audience of aspiring compliance leaders to get a better understanding of the context in which you serve in your capacity as chief compliance officers. So could we begin our discussion by having each of you briefly describe your current roles and responsibilities within your respective organizations? And I'll ask Megan to begin.
Sure. Thanks, Don, and welcome to everybody on the call. I am the Chief Compliance Officer at Athene, and when I say that, I am the Chief Compliance Officer of all Athene's U.S.-based insurance companies. And then in 2018, I also became the Chief Compliance Officer for our holding company, Athene Holdings. So I have both of those roles. There is no other compliance at Athene. It is me and my wonderful team I work with. And I pretty much have every gamut of compliance. The one thing I happen not to have, because we place it in legal, at Athene is privacy. So that's one of those nuances that I happen not to own that function. I report directly to the general counsel of the holding company, but I also meet on a monthly basis with the CEO of the company, and I report directly to the board. So that is just a little bit about my scope. I've been with this company since 2004, so kind of a long time.
Well, that's a very significant responsibility, Megan. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Appreciate that. And Jim?
Thank you, Don. As Don indicated, I'm with a smaller company, as indicated by all the titles I have. I don't know that they mean a whole lot, but in the end, we have a compliance area that is responsible for most of the things most compliance departments are, but they include AML, fraud, as well as your day-to-day processing. The suitability review is housed in our compliance area. We also do product filings, the market conduct annual statements, complaints, a whole realm of things. Also under our umbrella is privacy to a certain extent. And I guess it's housed as part of, we have one combined legal and compliance department. We are a small staff. Total, we only have 9 people within the department. And I do report directly to the president, but also to our board of directors. I guess that's the extent of our coverage right now.
Good. Well, thank you, Jim. And I think it's important to note the distinctions between perhaps the resources that might be available when you're working with a larger team versus a more limited team. And that presents a unique set of challenges, and perhaps we'll touch upon that during our discussion today. So the first topic I'd like to revisit that we talked about in some of our previous sessions is this concept of a presence of leadership And we'd be very much interested in gathering your perspectives on this question as well. So what I'd like to do is to start by asking if each of you might be able to share your thoughts on why establishing a presence of leadership is important in terms of your role as a compliance leader at your respective companies. And Jim, let me begin with you.
Okay, thank you. It's important because what it comes down to, a presence of leadership comes down to one word: confidence. And that's having it in yourself and instilling it in others. How you do that, though, it's all personal. Everybody has to develop their own style. I do think there are some common elements to that, though. One of them is being knowledgeable, knowing your subject matter when you are interacting with your coworkers, with the executive team, with your board. You need to know the subject matter. Don't try and wing it. Know the positives and negatives. Show that you understand the risks and what it means to the business under review. You need to understand the business as a whole. You can't just be in a silo. So those are clearly things you need to focus on in establishing your persona. I think another thing is you can't be shy. I think everybody who's in this area who progresses, you have to be willing to be an extrovert. Now, that's not being an extrovert in a manner that you're stepping out of your shoes, so to say, but being an extrovert on those things of which you have responsibility. And being an extrovert would include not deferring to others just because they have a higher title than you or that they're responsible for a certain area. You have an expertise also, and you have to be willing to share it and to fulfill your responsibilities to them. So again, that's another way of showing your willingness or establishing your willingness to be a leader. And finally, in the end, a third component I think that all compliance officers will explain to you, including Megan, is that you have to be willing to take on challenges and find solutions. As Don said, working for a smaller company, there's more of that opportunity probably, but it exists in big companies too. I started in a big company. I happened to start at a time when privacy was becoming prevalent in anti-money laundering, and those gave me opportunities to show my leadership ability and to establish that persona. So again, I think those are some of my thoughts on establishing your own persona within your own company.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I think that you made several great points. And the first is that there are opportunities to volunteer on various projects. They may not be the specific project you might like in the first instance, but if you can keep an open mind, oftentimes a particular project in which you can play a leadership role will be observed by others. And that really can help to establish that presence of leadership. And then I guess the other item, Jim, you mentioned, which certainly resonated with me, and I know Megan's got some thoughts around this as well, is the idea that, you are there to contribute, and you should be willing to contribute and not necessarily be intimidated if you're in a meeting with, senior members of your staff. They too have their weaknesses. Keep that in mind. You may be the subject matter expertise on a particular issue, and you can provide very valuable insights. So it's important to be proactive in terms of your participation in these meetings. Megan, let me present the same question to you.
Yeah, a lot of what I have to offer is very similar to what Jim talked about, but I can't stress enough the importance of preparing in advance for meetings, particularly meetings where you're going to be in front of an audience that you're wanting to influence or build your sphere of influence with. So really preparing and practicing in advance of those meetings. So if you know you're somebody that is not comfortable talking in front of the group, it's not your strength. There's plenty of us like that that aren't comfortable with that. But it goes with the territory. You have to be able to embrace those opportunities. So it's just practicing, getting comfortable with where those skills are that you're not as strong at. So if you are very well prepared with the subject matter and you've done your homework, and you walk into a meeting and you know you're educated, it's much easier to come across with that confidence that Jim was talking about. Definitely you want to be strategic about speaking up in meetings. We talk a lot about this with our team, that don't wait till the end of the meeting to just tack on a comment at the very end. Speak up strategically when you know you have something to offer, and don't second guess that. You do have something to offer. If you've done your work and you're prepared, you have something to offer, and you want to use that voice. So if you come to a meeting and your voice is never heard, it sends the wrong message. It's sending a message you either don't know what you're talking about, or you don't have the confidence to speak up. So you want to make sure you're not sending the wrong message by not speaking up. You know, at the same time, you have to be strategic. You don't want to talk the entire meeting. You don't want to get into an area where you know you don't know it. Don't dive into that topic. So be strategic. My best advice on developing a presence is, we all see leaders that we know we want to emulate. They are people that grab our attention, that engage us. And so I try to look at that and copy, steal methods that they use, take bits and pieces from all of those, and then develop my own voice and presence from there. So you always want to be true to yourself and be the kind of leader that is true to your individual voice, but it's just fine to emulate those skills and those methods that you see in others, particularly if they just happen to click for you.
Yeah, Megan, those are great points. And I know, all of us are very busy and we're moving from meeting to meeting to meeting, and it sometimes probably seems like it's very difficult to get prepared appropriately. But, it may be helpful to try to carve out time for yourself and look at your calendar at the end of a day and say, what do I need to do tomorrow? And what can I do to prepare better for these meetings going forward? I mean, Megan raised a great point as well, and that is that, everyone has a unique perspective on compliance challenges, and your perspective is unique to yourself, and it's valuable to your company. And therefore, you should be encouraged to share that perspective so that you're really providing true value for your participation in these types of activities. I think it's very, very important. And then I think the other key theme I heard from both Jim and Megan is that you need to be yourself. You need to develop your own style. You may see others that you might emulate as leaders, but ultimately you need to think through how you are going to assimilate those types of positive activities into your day-to-day persona and who you want to be as a leader. So excellent insights, Jim and Megan. Let's move to our next subject matter, and this is the question of promoting leadership in integrity and compliance and ethics at your respective organizations. And as compliance leaders, I think we are often looked to play that leadership role, and so that might not be an easy leadership skill to apply. So how do each of you provide leadership in integrity and compliance at your companies? And Jim, let me start with you.
John, the first thing I do is I make sure integrity is part of my main compass and ethics, because as we all know, there are certain things that clearly may be legal to do, but they may not be ethical. And I think we as compliance people have to focus not solely on the letter of the law, but certainly delve into the spirit of the law and talk about that. An important question to always ask is, would you like your family member to be treated this way? That I use as a common question if I feel there is an issue arising that somebody may want to go beyond the law or comply with the law, but maybe address it in a manner that I don't feel is legal or possibly unethical. Because you still also have to be worried or be concerned about and express this. What does this mean to the company in terms of its interaction, say, with the Department of Insurance or in dealing with the consumer? What kind of impression are they going to have? Because one rule of law that I've always operated under, and again, I think it's expanded. When I first started in the business many, many moons ago, the rule was that if somebody complained to you and they weren't happy, they were going to let 10 other people know about their unhappiness. We know now with social media, we're talking multiple, 10, exponential tens. They're going to put stuff out there and people are going to read it. And so you want to be able to also help counsel or provide advice that goes beyond just the regulation, and be willing to do that and not be afraid to do that. You don't want people to think you're being an authoritarian, but you still have to be a voice of a reasonable positions. In the end, one of my goals every year that I give to the person I report to, the president of the company, is to protect the reputation of the company. That is a goal, and that's reflected in how we manage complaints, how we manage non-compliance situations, how we manage market conduct exams. All those come into play when you're talking about integrity and ethics. As I was thinking about today's presentation, I have a sign in my office, not a sign, but it's a quote that my wife did for me. It's framed, and I've had it in my office now for 10 years or so. And it's something that I use in this area that guides my work and even my personal life. It's from Theodore Hesburgh, who's former president of Notre Dame. And it's very simple. My basic principle is that you don't make decisions because they are easy. You don't make them because they are cheap. You don't make them because they're popular. You make them because they're right. And that's, to me, sums up where ethics and integrity comes into our role in the companies we work for.
Well said, Jim. Well said. Megan.
Some of the similar themes to what Jim talked about. We often come back to complaints because I think they're a great opportunity to demonstrate the ethics and integrity of your company to your consumers. When we talk about those interactions, and this can be complaints, it can be producers when we're dealing with a suitability issue, or just anybody who's expressing some frustration. The first thing I talk about is, let's make sure we're treating everybody like a fellow human being. Are we listening? Are we letting them share their frustration and angst? Are we listening in a way that we're preparing to defend the company? Or are we listening in a way to understand what the issue is? And before you can figure out what's right and wrong and what's the ethical position of the company, you got to hear and you got to listen to that. So, take those as opportunities to better understand those frustrations, and really hear what's being said, so you can arrive at the right answer. The right answer is not always black and white in our positions. I think where you land, whether it sits in the right spot, but it doesn't look the same in every situation. So trying to really listen and understand concerns, treating people well, and making sure that even if you have to deliver the result that they don't like, was it done in a way that carries the tone and the feeling you want someone to have when they're interacting with your company, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a producer that sells for the company, whether it's an outside regulator that you might absolutely disagree with, but did you listen? Did you understand each other? And the way in which you interact tells so much of that story. So, I always land at, will I feel comfortable defending this position, no matter who I'm defending the position to, whether it becomes public, whether I'm telling the story over the dinner table, is it something that I know sits right? And making sure I'm really empowering my team to make decisions that sit right with them as well, making sure we're on the same page with that, and having the conversation with each other when there might be a disagreement as to the right way to handle things. Because, as Jim mentioned earlier, just because we can do things legally doesn't mean it's the right resolution or the right way to handle a matter. So making sure you're giving your team and the folks you work with, the freedom to have those conversations and push back on each other as peers, so you land in the right spot and set the right tone.
Well, that's great, Megan, because it seems to me as though you actually consult with your team on these types of decisions too. And if there are differences of perspective as to how to proceed, you gather their input on those issues. And to me, this goes back to reinforce some of the communications concepts we talked about last time, with listening being really an essential element of effective communication. So that's very important as well. Jim, you noted the idea of the importance of protecting the reputation of the company. And I think given the fact that we are all so busy these days, perhaps maybe those larger concepts we could put on the back burner. But bear in mind, the nature of our business is such where we are selling intangible products. And the premise upon which people make decisions to do business with your company are often based upon their ability to trust your organization. And it's very, very easy to damage that trust very quickly, and that can impair the perception of your company in the marketplace for years to come. And also, I would add, has the potential ancillary effect on the perception of the life industry overall. So each of you as aspiring compliance leaders play a very important role in protecting the reputation of your company, speaking out in meetings when you think that something may be going askew, and to be a leader and demonstrate that role of integrity and ethics at your organization is really a bedrock principle of the importance of the work that you do day to day. Well, let's visit another issue that we talked about previously, and I'm interested in different perceptions on these questions, and clearly we talked at length previously at one of our sessions about the importance of working with your business partners and fostering strong relationships. And knowing that we would have both Megan and Jim here today to gather their perspectives on this question, I just thought it was important for us to revisit it. So Megan, let me start with you first. And could you share some thoughts on how you go about establishing strong relationships with business partners?
Sure, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record based on what I was just talking about, but it starts with listening to your business partners, trying to understand what their drivers are, what they're trying to accomplish. I always start with the premise that my business partners are not trying to do things that are not compliant. They are trying to do things that are compliant. They just don't know how to get there. And so they've got an idea. And so listening to them explain it, why it matters to the organization, the growth possibilities if we can put something into place, starting by at that point, not starting with a no. And I know Jim has some great examples of this, but meeting them at a place where it's clear that you're going to be a problem-solving partner with them. So when you hear ideas, trying to identify along the way what potential solutions are that might meet their needs, even if you can't do things the way that they want them to be done. I can't do that, but what about this? Or what if we looked at this from a different perspective? But constantly reassuring them that you're trying to meet them where they are, and you're trying to find that common ground that allows what can be an exciting, innovative move for the company to move forward if you can look at it with open eyes and an open mind. So really just going into it with that perspective and assuming the best out of your business partners and starting with that tone goes a long way.
Yeah, Megan, those are great points. And I think, there may be tendencies in compliance, in water cooler discussions to think, well, our business partners, they're just interested in selling products and not really interested in perhaps maybe doing things the right way. And I think you make a great point. I think most people that we meet in the business side have altruistic intentions. They want to do the right thing, but they might not know how to do it. The other item I would mention here for our group of aspiring compliance leaders is that sometimes there's a tendency in compliance, I believe, to look at the black letter law and say, well, here's a reason why you can't do this. Well, that's not really providing a value add in my view. In other words, as Megan pointed out, it's really important to listen to your business partners, see what their goals are, understand the business model, and see if you can develop a solution that would allow you to meet the black letter of the law, but at the same time meet your business partner's objectives as well. So all good points, Megan. Jim, let me ask for your perspective on this issue.
Well, you've all heard within the last 5 minutes the word listen probably 5-6 times, and I'm going to say it again because it is so critical. Don't just hear people, listen to them. Show them respect. Digest what they're saying to you. I personally, within the last 6 months or so, made it my own personal goal to listen better. I realized that over the last year and a half, we've all been doing this. We've been meeting by video conference. And what do you do when you meet by video conference? You multitask. You can look at emails. You can do this. You can do that. Instead of focusing on that screen and the people on that screen, by listening, you're showing a partnership. You're showing respect for those people. And hopefully that will generate respect and a partnership in return. It's a lot harder to be distracted when you're in in-person meetings. So again, please do listen, even on when you're having meetings by video conference, again, which is much more prevalent these days. By doing that, again, you're laying the base. And please do try to lay the base in terms of getting to know these people personally before you actually have to sit down with them and talk about a potential issue or solution or problem that's come up. I guess best way Don and Megan both hit on it. Don't be seen as a no person. I had an example. I was in a board meeting actually, and our CEO, something came up, and I was explaining the risks, and his immediate reaction was, "Well, you have to learn not to be a no person." And I had to explain to him in front of our directors that, well, please understand, I'm not saying no. What I am doing is advising on the risks associated with what we're discussing. And if I don't do that, I've failed in my responsibility to you to provide you the guidance and the benefit of my experience. So again, we should always be trying to look for solutions. And Megan referenced a long time ago, I was forced to put my creative hat on, which I'm not really good at, I'm not creative, but it was, they asked, what could you draw one picture to illustrate what compliance does? And immediately, probably a lot of people's mind, it comes to idea something like a police car. Oh, you're here to enforce the rules and the regulations. And that was my immediate reaction. But after I thought about it a little bit, I came up with a different interpretation, and that I drew a fire truck. Because I think I see compliance as a fire department. You are providing customer service in this area, and that customer service is, one, preventing fires from happening. That's number one. That's our role. But two, if it does happen, is working with your customers and hopefully your partners, people you've built partnership with, to put that fire out and to mitigate the damage that it may cause to your company. Of course, when we can talk about damage, we start going back to the ethics of something, reputation, trust, things of that nature. But so I keep that in the forefront of my mind, and I have the benefit and the luck of being every year able to present on our code of conduct, our business conduct and ethics. And I always bring that up, make sure I tell them, listen, compliance and legal are here to serve you in a fire department role. And I specifically say a fire department role because I think that really illustrates what we should be all about and what we are about. And I think if we keep that focus, we will build those partnerships.
Yeah, I think a great point and a great analogy, and I think that's just a great image to keep in mind, Jim, and appreciate you sharing that. You know, I guess the idea of working with your business partners, we've touched on just some of the other concepts we explored in some of our prior sessions as well, certainly would include, it's very important, first of all, to understand the business and understand the business goals. I think you will enhance your credibility with your peers as an advisor to the business if you can demonstrate that indeed you understand the business and you are on, in essence, their side of the table to the extent you're able to do so. I think also it's important to keep in mind that maybe using Jim's fire department analogy, you don't want to meet the homeowner the first time the house is on fire. You know, in other words, you want to spend time with your business partners in a sort of more casual setting, get to know them as people, and then when an issue comes up that may potentially be contentious, you've got a better opportunity, I think, to sort of work through some of those challenges. So some really good points there. Really appreciate that, Jim and Megan. Let's move on. One item that we've touched on, I believe just tangentially, but we wanted to spend a few moments to focus on it today because I know in some of our networking conversations this issue has come up, and that is the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ, or emotional quotient, if you will. And I think many of you know the management literature on developing strong leadership skills often cites the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ, in terms of being an effective leader. So I wanted to take a moment today to ask both Megan and Jim what their perspectives are on this concept of EQ, or emotional intelligence, in terms of their own career and their observations of other leaders they've emulated. And Megan, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think this is one of those intangible soft skills that is just so essential to success as a leader. And, I really start with understanding who you work with. So whether it's a business partner or whether it's leading a team and being a leader, understanding who you work with. So again, we're back to the word listening really carefully, not jumping to a conclusion, and really trying to understand what folks are trying to convey to you. So picking up on subtle cues in the way they communicate that may express some frustration. It could express reserve. It could express hesitation. And paying attention and listening to those cues is a part of really having your antenna up on who you're working with. You want to, you absolutely want to pay attention to it. I have an example of it. It's sort of a small example of where I was trying to send some subtle cues to my team. It didn't work very well. So I'll tell you the story, and you guys can take it for what it's worth. But there's certain things we have in our area. We have about 30 people in our compliance department, and we like to plan fun things. So depending on where the COVID environment is, we might have a chili cook-off in the fall. We might have some kind of white elephant holiday exchange. Sometimes we go off-site and we will do, the equivalent of a Topgolf, which Des Moines is not big enough to have, but we have other things like that. Anyway, and I generally say, hey, who has an interest in planning this stuff? Who wants to get involved and help me plan some things? So we have some fun things to look forward to. And inevitably, it's the same group of people that plan these events, and they have a tendency to gravitate towards the women in our department. So most recently, I sent a note to my team and said, really looking for new faces, looking for new volunteers, looking for folks who haven't jumped in to plan some things, so that this doesn't always fall to the same people. Anyway, my subtle cues were not picked up. So I finally just went to the men on our team and said, hey, listen, you have a bunch of women that you work with that are happy to plan things and enjoy planning things, but they don't like feeling like they have to do it, and it's a part of their additional job responsibilities. They want to do it because it's fun and they enjoy doing it. So if you occasionally offer to pitch in, and we have that from everyone on the team, and you pitch in when it's something that most interests you, that's going to go a long way with your coworkers. And it was one of those kind of, I thought they just loved planning those things, which sometimes they do, but they also felt like we had a number of people that were feeling like, well, if I don't do it, no one will do it, and we just won't have those events. So it was a good conversation. It's a tiny thing that can make a big difference. And there were cues that were missed by some members of our team. And then there were cues that were being sent by other members of our team saying, well, I'll do it if no one else will. That's not the same as I'd love to do this, and that would be a ball of fun to be involved in. So sending those cues, paying attention to those cues, no matter who you're working with, and it can be something big, it can be something small, but what it's showing people is you know who they are, and you're paying attention to it, and you value them as a person. So that's my approach, and I can't stress how important this is to being successful as a leader.
Those are great comments, Megan. And it's difficult, I think we all would admit, to try to be sensitive to those subtle cues. It's not always easy to pick up on them. But I think you made a great point, Megan, when you said that to the extent that you can, it demonstrates that you value the person. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we all wish to be valued in one form or another. And I think that's confirmation of the importance of that issue in leadership skills. Jim, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, as you're going to see, Megan and I have a lot of thoughts that are all along the same line, very common. And I agree pretty much with everything she said. And I think the best way I could put it is in summary is really you have to be in tune with the people you're dealing with. This is true, obviously, in your personal life, in your family, your friends, people you hang around with outside of work. They're all different personalities. They all have, they're at different stages in their life. They have different things going on in their life. And those are all important in terms of as much as you can know about them when you're interacting with them to make it an effective interaction. It's probably become more difficult these days, again, because of video conferencing. You may not be seeing the subtle body language or other things that maybe you normally would see if you're meeting with them in person. So it's probably even more important these days as we move to more work from home, because that emotional quotient obviously isn't just with those people who your peers that have similar level positions with you or the people you report to, but it's the people who report to you that you're going to be asked to lead. You have to be in tune with each one of them and know how to deal with each one of them, because as with everything else, you don't deal with each one the same way. If you do, it's going to be effective with some, but it's not going to be effective with others. And so you just need to be aware. I mean, I guess I have an example that I use, it comes immediately to mind, is the person I report to. I can tell by how he's acting when I meet with him what else maybe is going on. You know, he's usually pretty even-keeled, even going, but I can pick up subtle hints when I interact with him that maybe at certain points, maybe he has more on his mind, more stressful things that he's dealing with. And obviously that's going to affect, maybe I may decide right then and there when I walk in that office that maybe I'm not going to talk to him right then and there about it, because I know maybe it's a high stress thing also, but it can wait. But I don't want to dump on him, quote unquote, dump on him when maybe he has a lot on his mind already. So, I mean, these are things you got to learn to pick up. And you have to know what's going on with people's lives as much as possible. You're the people who you work with. You're always sensitive to what's going on in their lives, because that will impact, or it should impact, how you interact with them possibly in that, during that period in their lives. So again, 2 words: be in tune. Be in tune to people. Be aware of them. You have to ultimately be effective in your role.
That's very helpful, Jim. And I think your analogy with your meeting with the CEO and perhaps maybe not being in a position to have their full attention is another area where you can pick up just cues that would help you in terms of guiding your behavior and strategies. I mean, I think it's just also reinforces the idea that, although we all spend a lot of time at work, that's not all the time that we spend during our waking hours. And so people have activities that take place outside of their work environment, may impact their perspective on how they have to operate day to day. And it's important to be sensitive that those types of external factors could impact an employee's morale and also behavior in the workplace, and to be sensitive to those issues as well to be effective as a compliance leader. Well, let's transition to our next topic, which is one that I'm not sure we spent a lot of time focusing on, but as we prepared for this session today, we thought this is an important issue to address. And that is that oftentimes when you are working as a compliance professional within your company, there may be a tendency to have your viewpoint become very company-centric. In other words, what products do we have available? Are we going to get this product approved in this particular state? Let's move this initiative forward. And at times, there may be a tendency to want to not take the time to look outside of your company and understand what's going on in the broader regulatory ecosphere, if you will, as a way to provide value-added input into discussions that will take place that are within your company and relate to your company's business. So I wanted to take a few moments this afternoon to ask both Jim and Megan if they could share their thoughts on perhaps maybe the focus and the value add that can be provided by allowing yourself to spend some time either reading or engaging in industry associations like CEFLI and others to allow you to be able to gain a better understanding of the of the environment in which your businesses operate. So Jim, let me start with you.
Yeah, I can't stress enough being willing to go outside your company and to interact in a variety of different ways, starting with reading, but to me, that's the minimal. I mean, if you do nothing other than stay within the walls of your company, you're operating with blinders on. You're not seeing, first of all, how others may be dealing with things. They may have solutions that you need, but you're not availing yourselves of opportunity to find that out. You're not staying in tune with new things that maybe are going on in the industry, new regulations that are percolating, things of that nature. There's just tremendous value in being part of the industry as a whole. You can start, certainly there's more opportunities the higher you go in your company, but you can always start by getting the opportunity, asking for the opportunity to go to outside conferences. To me, those conferences, a primary benefit certainly is the knowledge you will gain by sitting through the sessions that are put on. CEFLI is a good example. Have the annual conference coming up, in a couple of weeks. Yeah, those are very valuable. Those are tremendous. But two, once we get back to more in live or in person conferences, it gives you a chance to network. You're all doing that now. I've heard great things about the after presentation discussions you have. That's important. You have to build that network. You have to have those peers that you can go to when you have a problem or a question to bounce off them to see how they may be handling it. Because as we know, there isn't always one way, there isn't always one solution to a problem. Look for other opportunities, because at any level, a good example for me are the CEFLI webinars. They're always looking for people to present on different topics. If you think your company handles a certain topic in a unique way and you're willing to share that, they're willing to have people present. It's not just the chief compliance officers are presenting. There are people who are there at the street level who are, day in the trenches, day in and day out. They probably have some of the better knowledge. They have the war stories. So again, look for those opportunities. There is no doubt about it that it is important to your development and your success, and certainly the success of your organization, if you can bring that perspective back to the organization.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I just want to confirm Carla Strouch is on our call today. Carla moderates our webinar activity, and I know she would be more than welcome to accept volunteers to speak. So there's a very easy opportunity. If you feel you might have an interest and expertise in a particular area, let us know. We'd be happy to entertain that opportunity. Megan, your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I think this is hard. All of you are participating in this because you're valued by your organization. You're probably seen as an up-and-coming leader. But what comes along with that is a lot of work and a lot of responsibilities, and you're busy. So trying to make the time for this is hard. I remember, I'm still challenged by this, but I definitely remember this earlier in my career, how hard it was to make time for this. But it is incredibly important, and it really adds to your credibility. So I think you have to be picky. And I think you have to be strategic about what you get involved in. So you can't do everything. If you do everything, you're not going to do it all well. So be picky, be strategic, but find something to get involved in that's external. And when you do it, bring it back to your organization. Remind them that you're participating in it and what you're getting out of it and how you're going to bring it back to the organization and add organizational value by what you're learning from that external experience. And lastly, if you are going to volunteer, if you're going to participate, only do it if you have the time to do it well. If you know it's a window of time based on your personal life or what you have going on professionally, that you're not going to be able to do it well or spend the amount of time on it you need to really get something out of it, defer for a little while. It's okay to say, okay, that I need to revisit in 6 months, because sometimes participating and having it go poorly can cause more damage than the positivity that can come from participating and having it go well. So just be smart about that time. Your time is a valuable resource. You need to do this. It's part of growing as a leader within compliance. But just be smart and picky about it, and know that it's hard for everybody to fit this in. I remember when I would travel back at our days when we were traveling, and I'd go to a conference and my kids were little, and it would get to the end of the conference and all I wanted to do is to go back to my hotel room where I was in charge of the TV clicker on my own, and nobody would bug me for a couple of hours and I could have some peace and quiet, which is the benefit of traveling when you have small children. And the answer is sometimes I did need to do that. And I did give myself permission to do that. But you can't do it all the time. So you have to resist the urge to kind of hide back in that space and get out there, do a dinner, go to a networking session, and participate so that you have the time at that moment, because it's really going to yield dividends for you. But we all recognize how hard this is. So just keep trying and finding those opportunities, because they can make a huge difference.
Yeah, you're right, Megan. I think it is hard, and especially given the demands of internal responsibilities for everybody that's on this call. So it is difficult to try to reach out, but I think the idea that doing so can be beneficial not only to you but also to your company, and the idea of making sure that if you are going to participate in these events, say as a speaker, what have you, that you're able to do it well and that you've got the time to do it. I think those are key points, Megan. You're absolutely right. So I think there is a value that can be provided. I remember years ago in my early portions of my career, if I would go to a conference and I thought to myself, if there's one or two key nuggets I can take away from this conference and bring back to my company, the attendance is worthwhile. So I think you should always be, again, actively listening for those types of insights that can be shared collectively among a group of professionals in our industry, so that you can not only enhance your own knowledge, but bring that knowledge back for the benefit of your companies as well. So let's move to our next agenda item, which revisits our last session. And I wouldn't let Jim and Megan get away from us without getting their perspectives on this important question of communications. And so, Megan, let me start with you. Could you share some thoughts on your viewpoint with why communications are important?
Yeah, and this is really where you build your influence, the way in which you communicate, and the number one thing I'd say is to make sure you know your audience, how you're going to communicate with your team members versus with the CEO versus when you're on a webinar successfully. You've got to know your audience, and you're going to tailor your message to your audience. It's also paying attention to those cues that Jim talked about with your audience. If you go into a meeting and you can tell when you're meeting with your boss that right now there's a fire they're trying to put out, plowing away with your to-do list probably doesn't make sense at that point. Shift and be able to be nimble and shift your message in what you need to communicate based on the appropriate time. And those are soft skills that you have to practice over and over again. So whether it's communicating in the hallway, whether it's communicating verbally at a meeting, or whether it's communicating in writing, you want to practice those skills. Things like making sure you get to the point right up front in the first paragraph of written communication. That's incredibly valuable if you know your message is going to folks whose time is a premium. You want to get to the point right at the beginning. You can add all the supporting materials after the fact. But it's, how you communicate and the way in which we do it. We all know when it goes well and when we're communicating well. So mark down what you did, practice that, repeat it, and keep evolving. I feel like I'm constantly trying to improve my communication skills the longer I'm doing this work.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, I know Jim mentioned it too, that this concept of being a better listener is something I think we're all challenged by, frankly. But I think I'll add to that, this concept of knowing your audience. And to me, an ancillary issue that I think is important to focus on is that the level of detail that you provide to a particular audience should be consistent with the objectives of that audience. And so the type of communication you'd provide to someone on your board or a CEO or senior management maybe more direct, succinct, rather than perhaps maybe a conversation with members of your staff. So I think those are important concepts to reinforce as well. Jim, your thoughts on communication?
Well, ditto to what you and Megan have said. It is critical. If you go back to the other topics we've discussed today, in terms of establishing your persona, establishing partnerships, your credibility, it's not going to work if you're not able to communicate. So it is important to pay attention to, like Megan, is something I continually try to be aware of. It's another thing I think that over the last year and a half, I would say was one positive I got about everything is focusing and thinking more about how I communicate, whether in person or I'm guilty of being distracted when we're on video conference calls like this. And I had to really take a step back and say, is that, what message can that be shown? Am I communicating to them? Maybe non-verbally, if people are aware I'm doing it, but even within my own self looking at it, is that the message I want to send, even if they're not getting it, that whatever they're saying isn't important. So again, it goes back to the listening, being aware of what's going on, what's being talked about, being respectful to them. Along those lines, I will always continue to advocate face-to-face meetings. If you do have to communicate, if you have the benefit of doing that, do it face-to-face. If you can't do that, the one thing I can't say I was ever a big fan of video conferencing, but I do think once I got using Teams a lot, it's better than the phone, because it is good to put a face with a name and with a voice, and hopefully you continue to make eye-to-eye contact with the people you're talking about. Then pick up the phone if you can't do that. Last but least, use the written word, use the email. But in all ways in which you communicate, please be aware of the tone of how you're communicating, how you're speaking, how you're writing. You may not think it comes through in writing, but it does. We all see those emails where we say, boy, this person appears angry, or this person appears confused, whatever it may be. And that's why I advocate doing it more in person, because it takes some of that uncertainty out. But just be aware of how you're writing. I've always been someone, I don't care what email I'm writing, I probably reread it 3 or 4 times before I send it. First of all, to make sure there's no misspellings or anything like that, but also to say, is this communicating clearly what I want to communicate? Could this sentence be written a different way to more accurately portray what I want to communicate? So I do think it's critical. I do think it's important for us to continually be aware of how we're doing it, and to to work on it. I want to bring up one other point in terms of communication, because I do think it's important, and I do share this in our code of conduct training, that we all know we're in a much more culturally diverse society. And that's important to keep in mind as you communicate, because what you communicate within one culture may be different than another. And I'll have one example, because I do think it's funny, but it was like an eye-opener to me. At one point, I lived next to a family that was from another country, a country over in the Middle East. And we got along great. And they had children, and once their children were born, every time I'd see the kids outside, I was always saying, hey, how are you doing? Is everything good? And I'd give them the double thumbs up. And finally, their oldest child, when he was about 5, one day was walking by with his little brother, and he looks at me, he says, "You know that's bad." And I said, "This?" And he said, "Yes." And I'm like, "Okay." And his parents were standing over in their yard, and I looked over at him. I said, "Hey, is this bad where you come from?" And they go, "Yes." And I won't tell you what this means where they come from, but you can only guess. And I looked at him and I said, "Why didn't you tell me that?" And they go, "Well, we were too embarrassed. We didn't want to embarrass you that, you were giving a bad sign to our kids." He said, "We're worried because we're going back there next week and we're afraid they'll get off the plane and see their uncles and do this." But it's just something to be aware of. It was harmless, but it was like everybody communicates differently. Every culture communicates differently. I talk about the fact that even something as simple as putting your hand on the shoulder of someone when you're talking to them, that may offend them. So you just have to be aware of your style and how you're doing it, because it is important in the end, in that overall persona you create and the quality of the interactions you have.
Jim, I think that's a great example that reinforced the importance of nonverbal communication, right? In other words, those things arise and we may not even realize that we're communicating something, but in fact, for certain audiences, that may be true. And I think, Megan raised a good point, and I just want to reinforce it, and that is when you're thinking about writing business communications, especially considering the audience is perhaps maybe somebody at a more senior level, make sure that you take time to try to summarize at the outset what the content, what the main issue is, and then you can provide the details after the fact. That, I think, as a general rule of thumb, is a very important and effective means of communication and part of being a good communicator and a good leader overall. So Megan and Jim, there was one question I wanted to ask both of you that I thought was very important, and I always try to ask all chief compliance officers I run into, and that is, do you enjoy the work that you do? And Megan, let me start with you.
Yeah, I love my job. I'm pretty honest about that with people when they ask me. I'm a trained lawyer who loves being in a compliance role. I find that I have a whole lot more flexibility than I did in a legal role. At least in my experience, I love it, and I really think of it as serving my company. And when I talk about that, it's serving the consumers that use our products, serving our producers that sell them, serving the industry at large. And I really like that. I like helping other people and adding value by creatively solving problems. So yeah, I think it's a great career. It's a great field to be in. You all chose well.
Excellent, Megan. Good to hear. Jim.
Yes, I do. I have to say, obviously, no one grows up dreaming of being a compliance person.
They don't.
No. Don, you're unique. So
I know, right? At birth.
No, you grow up wanting to do something that, as Megan said, adds value. And I had the benefit of working in politics for about 10 years before I migrated into the private sector. And the one thing I pulled away from that, because I dealt with a lot of companies in doing that, was I wanted to work for what I call a good corporate citizen. And compliance was a way that I saw of being able to do that, being able to hopefully start working for a good corporate citizen and keep them there. But even if you end up with a company that maybe is challenged, you can help guide them to be that. And so, yeah, I do enjoy it because I do think it has a very good purpose and end goal. And I did, John, as I shared with you and Megan previously, I did have the luxury of taking a break away from my compliance career. And for a couple of years, I thought of going into education, so I actually substitute taught and stuff like that. But I eventually realized that setting wasn't for me. But it didn't mean I didn't enjoy the teaching part. And I realized that compliance is teaching, because you're teaching others the right way to do things, and certainly by law. But again, as we talked about, ethically and legally, you're having an opportunity to influence them in that way. And I do want to throw out the one other thing that I've enjoyed about my career in compliance, and that is it has allowed me to deal with a variety of topics and subject matters and things of that nature. It wasn't like there was just one thing where I was an expert on. I like, I guess, being a jack of all trades, and maybe not a master of any of them, but a jack of all trades. I enjoy that challenge. It keeps it interesting. As I tell our compliance people, I've always told them, listen, you got to understand that we have job guarantee, because as long as there are regulators who want to tell us how to do our job, and business people maybe who aren't going to do it in the way the regulator wants us to do it, we're always going to have a role there. And again, I say that seriously, but in a way that says, but it's an important role. It is something that I do think adds value, and in the end, I have enjoyed my career in the compliance area. Yes.
Excellent, Jim. Well, that's a reassuring prospect as well in terms of, the longevity of potential careers in compliance. And it seems as though, given the velocity of new laws and regulations we're all dealing with, there will be a need for compliance for years to come. So that it's certainly positive, and glad to hear both of you enjoy your experiences in compliance. We think it's important work, and we appreciate your contributions to it. So we now have an opportunity to just field a few questions. If anybody has any questions for either Jim or Megan that you'd like to submit, you can use that using the chat function. Anyone? All right. Well, let's transition into asking both Jim and Megan to share some final thoughts with us for this group. And Megan, let me start with you.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate, and Don and everyone at Sefli has my contact information. I love interacting and talking to other folks in the compliance world, so feel free to reach out, ask questions. I always think of questions after the presentation, not when they ask if I have any in the Q&A session. So feel free to send them my way or pick up the phone and give me a call. But I just end with recognize the value. You bring a lot of value, knowledge, background to the table. So make sure you recognize that value in all that you add to conversations and meetings in your team, but also keep growing in your role. The best thing you can do is be true to your voice and know your voice. But as you're true to your voice, keep enhancing your skills as a leader. We all can get stronger in a variety of ways. So you can stay true to yourself and also keep growing and enhancing your skills as a leader at the same time. So that'd be my parting words.
Great, Megan. Thanks so much. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to build on what Megan said. She said it well. Yeah, always be a lifelong learner, but that both subject matter wise, but also as far as your soft skills and everything else, always be looking to improve them. Do not discount, and don't let anyone discount the value you bring to your company and to the people you work with. It is important, even though we may not always get the love. It is there. We know they're going to be coming looking for us when something happens and they need our help. Unfortunately, we're behind the scenes a lot, but don't let that influence your view of what you do and how you do it. It is critical. It is important. It always will be. And it just continue, obviously, by you being here, you're looking for opportunity. You're looking for advancement. Continue to think that way. Don't be afraid to take risks, take on new subject matters, to take on new topics, new regulations. Even if it may sound contradictory, but even if it's not your strength, well, work on it, make it your strength, take it on, be upfront with people about it. And maybe you don't have the depth of knowledge that they initially want or whatever, but you're willing to learn and you're willing to take it on and move ahead. I think all those will continue to open doors for you and will continue to make you successful in this field, and enjoy it, have fun with it. There's a lot of good people, believe me. If you've had the opportunity to go to Sefli conferences or any other conference, you can find people who are willing to share and talk and socialize and communicate, and Megan talked about it earlier about at the conferences, wanting, because you're exhausted, you know you got work to do, wanting to go back to your hotel room. Try and fight that and get out there and build up the friendships and the connections and everything else. But it's good stuff, and I appreciate the opportunity of being able to speak with you all.
Well, Megan and Jim, I know you're both well-recognized compliance leaders in our industry, and your comments today certainly underscore why that is the case. And we are just delighted and so pleased to have you with us today and sharing your perspectives on these important questions. We have a unique audience here in our Compliance Leadership Development Forum of aspiring compliance leaders, and I'm sure they will join me in thanking you for the tremendous insights that you were able to provide today. So I know you're both very busy, and we very much appreciate your time, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, Don.
You bet. So now let's transition into our networking activity for this afternoon. And a couple of things we'd like to bring to your attention. First, let's take a few moments. We'll do this in just a moment to talk about some key learnings that you may have derived from this presentation. We also want to talk about the importance of continued networking and the fact that there will be opportunities for you to be able to continue to connect with one another. We'll be sending you a survey following the conclusion of our session today. You'll probably receive that in the next day or two, and or perhaps maybe immediately. I'm not certain with the operational elements of that, but we'd like to get your feedback, and it's very, very important to us. And we'd like also for you to share your perspectives on some other questions as well. We're considering the idea of possibly reconvening this group several months down the road, perhaps to maybe have an opportunity to reflect back on your experience in the forum and how it may have been applied within your individual respective companies. And that may be an opportunity as well. So let's go back to the beginning of our list, and let's open the floor, if we can, for a discussion of the key learnings that you may have derived from the presentation this afternoon. Anyone?
Hey Don, it's Michael Wheatley from Lincoln.
Yes, hi Michael.
I appreciated the chief compliance officers joining us, Jim and Megan. I thought that one, they reinforced a lot of the things that we do here at Lincoln, which is good to know that we're kind of in the middle of the pack on some of the practices, like trying to stay in tune with the industry through industry conferences or just networking like this. So that was good to know. And then I liked what Jim said at the beginning. They both talked about being confident, knowing the subject matter, and that breeds confidence. And then also Megan being prepared for meetings. And I think you nailed it, Don, when you said, when we're going from, I'm sure all of us have a meeting right after this one, right? So how do you prepare for that meeting? And it's really the day before. You got to do it. You got to do it kind of in the PM of the day before or some other time. But if you come in at 9 a.m. and expect to be, preparing for your meetings kind of on the fly, I think people notice that perhaps in a negative way.
Michael, those are great points. And, when we were preparing for this session, I was talking with Megan and Jim. Megan used a great phrase. She says, you just can't show up to a meeting and wing it. And I think that's absolutely true. So, and, to the point I made earlier, I understand how busy all of you are. We too at Cefly, we're very busy also. But it does require taking some time to just kind of look through your schedule, even over the course of a week, and try to parse out where you're going to be able to find the time to be able to prepare appropriately for a meeting. Makes a world of difference if you're able to take the time to do that. And that goes to Megan's point about conducting work outside of your routine activities in order to be prepared appropriately. So thank you, Michael. Those are great insights. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Monica.
Hi, Monica.
Hi, Don. As usual, I really enjoy your webinars, presentations, and everything. And there were two things that really stuck in my head. One was know your audience.
Yeah.
because, when you're in compliance, and granted, I am not the chief compliance officer, I'm government relations, government and industry relations, but know your audience is very important because I have to sometimes address compliance people or marketing people or actuarial. And it makes it challenging to put my feet in their shoes on how they see things, for me to communicate, this is what I want you to take from what I'm saying, and not take it the wrong way. And the other one was, and that was Jim. I said, just because it's on the code, that doesn't mean it's ethical.
Right.
And that goes a long way when you deal like with marketing people. Like they don't see anything wrong on anything. And they're like, well, it's not really good, right? So again, I really appreciate Jim and Megan. They have great insights, and I like the idea of having a small company and a big company, because I understand as small companies we don't have the amount of people in different areas. And granted, our compliance department is for a small company is large. But I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this forum. And I really would like to get together again, and hopefully in person.
Yes, right.
One of these
I think we
days.
all aspire to that. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Monica, those are great comments, and thank you very much. And talking about that issue of applying an ethical veneer, if you will, to the analysis of compliance questions, often you can come up with an answer that would indeed comply with the law, but you always need to think it through in the context of what is our corporate culture, and is this consistent with our corporate culture? And I think that's a very important level of analysis that thoughtful leaders will apply to these types of questions. And given your role as aspiring leaders, you too should be applying that. And as they talked about today, don't be shy about offering your perspective. You are unique. You think differently than other people, and you have something to add. And the way you can provide value to your organization is by adding those types of perspectives. Anyone else? Comments in terms of what you may have learned today?
Hi, it's Matt Sayer from John Hancock.
Yes, Matt.
Hi. I was going to talk a little bit about the confidence part of that Michael spoke to. Just that it's not, it's not a trait that you're born with. Some people are, but that being prepared, like you talked about, goes a long way. Taking on new things, and being confident in that. So that was nice to hear. And then also not to be a no person. Right, because I've got that feeling in meetings that people are thinking I'm always saying no, and that I'm not trying to help. I'm a roadblock instead of trying to help them. So it was nice to hear that others have the same experience, and that some of the tips they gave to help quell those fears, that you're trying to stop them and you're actually trying to help them, and you're on the same team. So those were a few things I picked up that were really interesting.
No, those are great insights, Matt. And you're right. I mean, it's a balance, isn't it, between, the idea of wanting to do the right thing, and sometimes it is important to say no, or at least question what's going on. And what does that then do to potentially impairing your perception as an advisor to the business, somebody who is supportive of the business? That's challenging, and that's an issue I think we will be wrestling with, ad infinitum going forward. So, key point, Matt. Appreciate you raising it.
Thank you.
Any others?
Hi, everyone. It's Allison Soderberg from Lombard International.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Think, the way that I was listening to everything about how interconnected so many of the topics are, right? So if you're prepared for a meeting, you're going to be more confident. If you're, more confident in the meeting, you have more credibility, and just kind of building that over time. And also coming from a perspective where you are listening to them, and maybe even saying, I want to work with you. We're trying to find a place where, we can get to the solution that works for both of us. Instead of just kind of approaching them and being like, well, this is what it says and this is what it is. And maybe not, always coming directly, with an answer to a meeting, but, listening and coming back to them later. I also find, at least in my company, a lot of times I get requests for meetings and I don't know what it's for. So I think also, this wasn't specifically mentioned, but kind of asking for an agenda or what exactly do you want to talk about so that you can prepare in some way to have the hope of being helpful in the moment.
That's right. That's right. And, I'll just reinforce one other concept I think we talked about several sessions ago, and that is that if you are involved in a discussion and you're asked a specific question and you don't know the answer to it, don't try to finesse an answer that you think it might be the right response. It's perfectly fine to say, I'll get back to you on that issue, and you can research that and come up with a more informed perspective. So that's important as well. Any other comments on learnings for today?
It's Mallory. I liked his analogy of, I think we all often consider compliance. We think of a police car and this like bad cop sort of situation, but looking at it as a firefighter and a fire truck, I thought that was an interesting perspective from like a service standpoint. I thought that was a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, it's sort of a unique nuance on that question, but I do think it's important as well. And, and again, as I mentioned during our discussion, as you think about that relative to fires that might occur at all companies, and they do occur, it's important to have those relationships established in advance so that you make sure you know the individual who's seeking your assistance or perhaps maybe confronting you in some way on a particular issue well before you have to get into a contentious discussion, if indeed that has to take place at all. Any other perspectives on comments that were offered today? Okay. One other item I wanted to mention, and that is that our staff will be sending to you a certificate of achievement in the next several days to mark your participation in the 2021 cohort of the CEFLI Compliance Leadership Development Forum. And to be frank, you are our initial class in this format, so we hold you in high esteem and close to our hearts. So in that sense, we want to make sure that you're able to stay connected with one another. And I know that we've shared contact information. We've touched on it in a couple of our conversations previously, but it is important. And, the idea of being able to just sometimes, I make the argument compliance can be a lonely job. And, if you're confronting a particular issue and you're thinking, oh my God, I've been assigned this particular issue and our company is the only one that's handling this, pick up the phone and contact one of the people in this group and say, hey, this just came across my desk. Have you seen something like this? Do you know of somebody in the industry that's dealing with a similar issue? I could reach out to them. I think what you will find more often than not is most people are quite willing to take those types of calls or receive those emails. So don't be discouraged in terms of reaching out to others. And you have a unique network here. And these are people that are interested and committed to learning more about the profession and building their careers. I think it's going to be important for all of you to try to make an effort to stay in touch with one another. Let me just quickly ask Mallory, if I may. Mallory, will they be receiving a survey immediately after our session today, or will they be receiving that in the next few days?
Carla is going to be sending the communication. I don't know, are you sending it this week or are you sending it next? Okay.
It will likely be tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then Monday, but most likely tomorrow. And in that communication, you will, as Don mentioned, receive the certificate of achievement. You'll also get a copy of the roster for the entire cohort, as Don and the panel has referenced the importance of networking, and in the communication will be the link for survey. And we hope you take the time to give us some feedback on it. We really are interested in your thoughts and helping us as we deliver continuous education to other members.
Absolutely, and thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. And and again, here's an opportunity to perhaps maybe go back from time to time or revisit some of the concepts that we've explored. I would urge you and encourage you to try to make a list of goals for yourself, not only professional goals, but personal goals. So like you heard Jim Golombijewski today say, my goal over the last several months is to try to be a better listener. Those types of objectives allow these softer skills that we've spent months talking about to be a little bit more concrete. and it's a way to be able to practice. I mean, and you heard Megan mention it many times today. She was talking about practice, practice, practice. And I think it is important in terms of building those softer skills that we have learned over the course of the past several months are really essential. It's not the technical skills, it's really these softer skills that are essential in helping you to fulfill your own professional career goals. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude our session today. And I want to sincerely thank all of you for taking time from your schedule. I know you two are all busy, but we appreciate the confidence your companies have expressed in you and encouraging you to participate in this event. And we welcome your feedback when you receive your survey here in the next few days. So thanks very much, everybody. And thank you again for the important work you do, not only for your companies, but for our industry as well. We really appreciate it. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.